Let me tell you about the people in those remote mountain hollows. The ones where fog never quite lifts, even in July. Where creeks run dark and don't reflect the sky. Every evening as the sun goes down, they set the table for supper. 1 plate, 2 plates, sometimes 3. But the last plate is different. That one's set for the dead. Perfect silver forks, old ones that belonged to grandmothers, great-great-grandmothers. On that plate they put just a little of everything they're eating. A spoonful of beans, a piece of cornbread, water drawn from the well before sunrise. They call it the Silent Supper. And the rule is simple. You don't speak while that plate is set. Not a word, not a whisper. Not even to ask someone to pass the salt. The government didn't care about old traditions. Not at first. But in 1952, the Department of Energy came to Bitter Creek. They said uranium. They sent men in suits with clipboards. They measured things. They made maps. 1 map survived. 63 years later, it was filed away in an archive at Oak Ridge, Tennessee. The title read, Acoustic Dampening Survey, Bitter Creek Watershed. Classification level, restricted. A retired frequency analyst named Martin Sewell knew exactly what that meant. When he inherited his uncle's cabin at the edge of Bitter Creek, he found something that explained everything. Martin was 71 when he inherited the cabin. He'd spent his entire life listening to frequencies, radio waves, electromagnetic fields, the invisible humming the world makes when you know how to listen. The government had paid him well for this. 43 years in facilities so hidden they weren't on any map. The cabin should have been empty, but when Martin arrived, the air felt kept, like someone had been maintaining it. The fireplace had wood stacked neatly beside it. The cupboards had jars of preserves, all dated 1962. The first drawer he opened held official papers. At first he thought they might be deeds, but the letterhead made him stop. The Department of Energy seal. His hand started shaking. It was a protocol, a government protocol. Title, Regulations for Acoustic Preservation, Bitter Creek Temporal Anomaly, Code Orange Classification. Below it, a signature from someone named Dr. Harold Weston, Director, Oak Ridge Division. The first regulation was simple. All household members must observe the Silent Supper protocol every evening from sunset to sunrise. No speaking, whispering, singing, or intentional vocalization is permitted. The second regulation outlined fines. Violation through acoustic disturbance. The amount seemed arbitrary. $300, 847, 2100. Then Martin understood. They were keyed to something. Probably the frequency of the disturbance. The more you spoke, the more you owed. The third regulation mentioned compensatory acoustic harvesting and suggested that residents who followed the protocol would receive federal agricultural subsidies. That was the bargain. That was why people stayed. Martin found more documents. Purchase orders for brass instruments from 1954. Specifications for harmonic dampening equipment. The parts list was detailed. High-density brass tubing, resonance chambers, frequency modulators. He found a receipt for 17 units delivered via unmarked transport. The documents were dated up until 1982. Then they stopped. After 1982, the protocols just ended. They were never formally rescinded. They just stopped being maintained. But the brass dampeners, the industrial-sized harmonic devices hidden in the woods, those had never stopped running. The schematics showed 17 machines buried in those woods, humming beneath the leaves and soil. A low brown noise, the color of old leather, the color of dried blood. Martin decided to stay in the cabin. He told himself it was practical, but the truth was that he was terrified of leaving. The protocols had been clear even after all these years. On the first evening, he set the silent supper himself. 2 plates, one for him, one for the dead. He ate without speaking, listening to the humming in the air, that same low brown noise. By the 4th evening, he'd stopped calling anyone. The cabin seemed to resist contact with the outside world. His phone worked, but conversation sounded muffled, like speaking through water. The fog came on the 7th night. It rolled down from the ridge so thick that the world beyond 10 feet simply ceased to exist. He heard it around dusk. At first he thought perhaps someone was outside, a man perhaps. The sound was almost like singing, almost like words. But it was underneath the words, like harmony beneath melody. It vibrated in his chest. It made his teeth sing. Martin stepped outside. The fog swallowed him. He could see nothing, but the humming continued, circling. It wasn't threatening. It was inviting, like the sound of a door opening, like the sound of someone saying your name, but with their entire body instead of their voice. He should have stayed inside, should have remembered the first regulation. "Who's there?" he called into the fog. The humming stopped. The silence that followed was deeper than any silence Martin had experienced in his 71 years. It was the silence of every silent supper. Decades of held breath. Decades of unspoken grief. Then from the fog, a figure emerged. It was wearing a suit made of yellowed linen, the color of old bone, old teeth. It hung perfectly on a frame that suggested a human body, though something about the proportions was wrong. The arms were too long. The head was too still. It didn't walk so much as flow through the fog. The face was handsome in the way old photographs are handsome. Smooth, serene. But the eyes were reflecting pools. When Martin looked into them, he saw his own face. Dozens of versions, all of them scared. The guest smiled. It had very good teeth. "You called," it said. The voice was smooth as honey. Old honey. The kind that's been sitting in a glass for 100 years, crystallized at the edges. Martin should have run, but he found himself inviting the guest inside, found himself gesturing to the warmth of the fire, found himself breaking the protocol. The guest moved through the cabin like it knew the place. It sat in the chair across from the unset, silent supper plate with familiar ease. "You've read the regulations," the guest said. Not a question. Martin nodded. He could smell it now. Honey. But underneath was something else. Spoilage. Rot. The sweet smell of fruit left in a closed room too long. "They brought me here in 1952, the guest continued. They had studied the frequencies. They learned that acoustic phenomena could separate what is kept from what is given away, the soul from the sound, the spirit from the speech. The fire was still burning, but Martin couldn't hear the crackle anymore. The logs shifted silently in the flames. "They fed me at first," the guest said. "They brought me voices from radios, television signals, the broadcast hum of electricity. For 30 years they fed me the sounds of the living world, carefully curated. I grew so fat on your civilization's signal." The guest smiled. "But the equipment failed. The protocols were abandoned, and I became hungry. The silent supper was never meant to feed the dead," the guest explained, leaning forward. "The dead doesn't eat anything. The silent supper was meant to collect sound. Every evening, in every household, a silence so heavy it could be harvested. Silence that weighed something in the world." The guest began to hum, the same humming from the fog. But now it was inside the cabin, and it was different. It was the frequency of something being pulled, something being drawn out. Martin felt it in his teeth first. The vibration increased. His molars began to ache. Then he felt it in his throat. His voice, the thing he'd used for 71 years, began to feel like it was being pulled out of him, like thread. Like someone was reaching down his throat and extracting yarn, meter after meter, pulling his words out into the humming air, and the guest was consuming it. The clock on the mantelpiece stopped. The tick, tick, tick simply ceased. The fire made no sound. The wind outside made no sound. Even Martin's heartbeat had gone silent in his ears. Only the humming remained. Only the sensation of his voice being drawn out like smoke up a chimney. 71 years, the guest whispered. 71 years of quiet, of compliance, of following regulations you never understood. I will take all of it. Every word you never spoke, every comment you never made, every prayer you never voiced, every scream that stayed in your chest. The guest opened its mouth wider than should have been possible. Inside was nothing, a black space, a vacuum. And Martin felt his entire voice, every conversation he'd ever had, crystallizing and being pulled into that space. Martin doesn't know how long before he finally found the radio. Minutes, hours, days perhaps. His throat was raw but silent. The radio was beneath the floorboards in the bedroom. Military-grade transmitter. A frequency was already dialed in. When he pressed the button to transmit, a voice answered immediately. Calm, clinical, professional. Specimen 078-B, the voice said. Your status update is being recorded. Please indicate current vocal capacity. Martin opened his mouth. Nothing came out but air. Understood, the voice continued. Vocal matter consumption at 98.7%. Wax production at optimal levels. Subject will continue harvesting cycle until saturation point is reached. Federal compensation will be deposited quarterly per original agreement. You may continue the silent supper protocol indefinitely. The voice was female, maybe. Or maybe it was just a voice designed to sound like it came from nowhere. Like it came from the frequency itself. Wait, Martin tried to say. But nothing came out. He pressed the button again. Made desperate sounds his throat could no longer form into words. Specimen 078-B. Vocal disturbance detected. Please maintain silence protocol. Disturbance levels are affecting wax purity. Further violations will result in suspension of federal compensation. Martin realized what had happened. The government hadn't sent the guest to save the people of Bitter Creek. They'd sent it to farm them, to harvest the cumulative silence of an entire community and transform it into something else, something that crystallized, something with value. The guest was producing wax. The honey-colored wax coated every surface of the cabin. That amber substance nobody talked about, that had always been there. The radio continued. Wax production, 4.2 tons to date. Specimen 078-B represents 17% increase in annual output. Analysis indicates vocal suppression at generational level has created optimal crystalline structure. Continue protocol indefinitely. "10 years later, a LiDAR technician named David Reeves was surveying the ridge above Bitter Creek. The work was routine, mapping soil composition for a Department of Interior forestry study. Nothing unusual. But when he looked at the LiDAR readout near the Sewell cabin coordinates, something was wrong. The data showed a structure completely filled, not with earth or wood, but with something else. Something that rendered as pale amber. The entire cabin was filled with it, floor to ceiling. Wax. When David hiked down, he found the cabin exactly as the data suggested. It was barely standing, held together by the weight of thousands of pounds of crystallized wax. The walls looked like they were made of old honey. The windows were sealed shut with it. Inside, he found a voice recorder. Ancient. A reel-to-reel tape machine from the 1970s. When David pressed play, an old man's voice filled the space. Beneath it, the faint humming begins again. The voice was barely a whisper, almost not a voice at all. But it was there. "My name is Martin Sewell," the tape whispered. "I am specimen 078-B. The protocol is eternal. The guest is always hungry. The wax is always growing. If you're hearing this, and maybe I've finally managed to record the frequency of my own consumption." The tape crackled. The humming seemed to get louder. The silent supper is still set every evening in the cabins around Bitter Creek. The government never came back to maintain the equipment, but the dampening machines still hum in the ground. The people still speak in whispers. They still set that plate for the dead. The voice on the tape became even softer. "If you have read the regulations, then you know. If you have set the silent supper, then you know. If you have ever heard the humming in the damp mountain air, that honey-colored frequency that vibrates your teeth, then you know." The tape continued to play, but the voice was now barely perceptible, a whisper beneath whispers. The guest is not at the cabin anymore. It moved on. It always moves on when one host is fully harvested. And it's singing now somewhere in the fog. And people are setting places at their tables. And the silence is growing so thick you could cut it with a knife. The voice faded further. The humming seemed to take its place, becoming the narrator now. It's so quiet here now, so perfectly quiet. I think I'm finally understanding the protocol. The protocol is that there is no ending. The protocol is that the silence just keeps growing, getting thicker, getting sweeter. Set your table tomorrow evening. Don't speak. Don't break the rule. The guest is listening. The guest is always so. The tape crackled into white noise. The humming faded to almost nothing. Just the sound of something breathing. Just the whisper of old air moving through old wax. The humming drops to nearly nothing, barely perceptible. Just the darkness now, just the amber color of old honey in the moonlight. Just the fog rolling down from the ridge, so thick you can't see anything beyond it. Just silence.